Welcome, one and all, to another one of my live streams. I have to welcome to the studio the inimitable Stephanie Mitchell Hughes on her continuing journey, what we refer to as Resilience 2.0. We just got a point where your father had died,
Yes.
and then just set the scene.
Okay, so it was a Friday evening, June 12th, 2020. I found out that, my dad, he had collapsed. And then I subsequently learned, once my brother had arrived at my cousin's house, that he was dead. And so the whole night was just like a lot of.
How did that feel when you were first told? Did everything slow down? Did it all that stuff?
I just remember. I remember feeling like I had been hit in the middle of, like, between my eyebrows or on my forehead with a pole. Like I could just sort of hear it echoing. And then the other thing is that, and I fell. I remember falling to my knees and saying, basically, I can't do this. Like, you really cannot ask me to do this.
It was just one push too far, right?
Yeah, for me, I was just, because I'm thinking I'm here for my cousin. I'm focused on her. And I just don't really know how to have the bandwidth.
No, I've got you.
A parent. And, my dad was the first. My mother is still very much alive. And we have this incredibly small family. And the other thing that's happened, and you could probably relate to this too, is when our parents are gone, then we generally kind of step up to that line. The line that they stood on, which means that we also have to face our own mortality.
Yeah. It's a sudden reminder that we can no longer think of ourselves as superhuman. We have, it doesn't take much to push us in the wrong direction. And wow, yeah.
Right. Jesus. You're thinking about, like, okay, I only have but, and it's humbling, but the other thing is that I would hope that it would make us focused and less concerned about stuff, the material things, we would be more concerned about the relationships that we have with people, with each other, with ourselves, about living. And this is a cliche, at least here it is, living our best life. That's what we become concerned with doing. And,
wow.
And being able to walk that out. So the next day, that Saturday, was my aunt's funeral. And so my aunt, my cousin, and uncle, they lived in Atlanta. Well, and my cousin and her daughter, my second cousin, they both still live there. But my aunt and my uncle, of course, are now deceased, unfortunately. And my aunt was my cousin's last parent. And her funeral was that next day. And you add on top of that the fact that we're in the midst of a pandemic. And my cousin's church was shuttered, like many churches were.
Right.
In America during that time period. So the funeral had to be at the funeral home. And all I can just say is that the funeral home was doing an extremely brisk business. It was. I mean, there were funerals being held, viewings being held, people coming in to make funeral arrangements, and it just, and they themselves, they simply were not going to play around, in that they were taking people's temperatures and having you wash your hands and do all these other things.
And they wanted to get through it as quick as possible. So it was
because they didn't want COVID to start racing through their funeral home, the funeral home either.
No.
So that next morning, early that Saturday morning, my brother and sister-in-law, as I knew that my brother would, got up at dawn, and got in the car, and my brother already drives really fast as it is, and his SUV probably did not touch the ground until he got back to Ohio. So we're talking about an 900 mile drive. And he probably, and that's a drive that takes, I don't know, anywhere from 8 to 9 hours. And I would be willing to bet that he did it in 7.5 because he was trying to get home to my mother. And so I wound up calling and speaking to that morning. I wound up speaking to a friend of mine who attends my church. Her name's Merlin Ruffin. And I was telling her what happened. And I said to her, I said, well, I've got to leave. I've got to go home. I've got to go back to Cincinnati. I don't live in Cincinnati anymore, but I said, I've got to go to Cincinnati because my mother needs me. I need to be there with her. And the first thing she said to me was, you can't leave. And I said, well, why can't I leave? My father is dead. I'm not sure what I expected to do when I got to Cincinnati. I certainly couldn't change the fact that he was gone. I just said, I've got to go. And so she's like, but you still can't leave. And I said, well, why can't I leave? She's like, you have not completed your assignment. Your assignment was to go to Atlanta to stand in for your parents because they could not. And you wanted to stand to support your cousin as she buried your aunt. That is your assignment. And the funeral hasn't happened yet. And so you've got to
go no place.
Your assignment. And I just really wanted very much to argue with Marilyn about it. But I knew that she was right. I knew that
because this is the time to be to adult.
Right. To really to look inside and recognize that that is part and parcel of being an adult, of also, I think, understanding what aging is about and recognizing that as you get more in and further into that last quarter of your life, that life in and of itself and the circumstances, the situations that you're going to face, it just gets thicker and thicker and thicker. And situations like that, and that situation brought me back to the question that I ask myself again and again when I find myself in these really tough spaces is, you write about resilience, you talk about resilience, you write about overcoming and your journey through life's hard places, you write about living with a mental illness, you write about being suicidal, you write about all of these things. Do you really believe what you say, or is it all just some nice words that are on the page? Are you actually going to walk this out? And, you know, I want to be able to do that.
So you wanted to face, you had to face yourself.
Right. Because I want to be sincere in the work that I do.
No, of course.
I want to.
The hardest thing that anyone can do is to deal with one's own bullshit.
Right. Yeah, because you have got to be able to call your own self out.
Absolutely.
Because if you can't, I can stand in a mirror. If I had left, I could have sat and put a mirror up to my face and said a bunch of things to justify my decision to leave Atlanta and get on a plane or something and go back to Columbia or go to Cincinnati.
You've got to point to the king and say, that guy's got no clothes on. That's what you've got to be able to say.
It's like, oh, I'm going to go do this. And I can justify this.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I have to face myself. I have to live with integrity. And so I did what I needed to do and what I was supposed to do. The other thing is that I had to also think about what my father would expect me to do.
Wow. Well,
Because,
hang on. Were you clear on that?
yeah. Oh, yeah. Because the one thing that I will say to people, and we were talking about this, I've got that, facial expression. People may look at me and go, you know what, I'm afraid of her because she just looks like she's just going to scream and get out of my
No, I
face.
think you look. If I to be honest about you, look uncompromising.
Okay. And and that would be, especially if it is something that I feel very strongly about, that is true.
Yes,
That
but
is true.
uncompromising means no room for maneuver, which means why
Right.
open negotiations because you're just going to lose.
Right. Now, it's not with everything. It's with some stuff.
Yeah, but
But it's
women
not
don't
with
come with a
everything.
manual, so people just take on prima
Right.
facie evidence.
Exactly. So because the thing is that at the end of the day, I am my father's daughter.
Okay.
And I learned a lot from my dad. People think, oh, mothers impart all these things to their children, and they do. But I learned so much from my dad because I learned about cooking from my dad. My mother could cook. I learned about how to dress from a business perspective from my dad. I learned about shoes, professional shoes from my dad. Learned about how to present
Well,
myself
I wasn't expecting the
professionally
shoe
from
thing.
my
The rest
dad.
of it, I get. I wasn't expecting the shoe thing. I have to
Oh, yeah,
say.
definitely. I mean, it's not like my dad was like the Imelda Marcos of men's shoes. I mean, he wasn't that. We just didn't have shoes like all over creation. But he was good about picking out really nice shoes that they may not have been, you might not look
If
at
I
them.
take a straw poll of the women folk that I know and say, "What did you get for your dad?" I can warrant a dime to a dollar that not one of them will mention shoes in that equation.
Yeah, I mean, I would know, okay.
Hashtag just saying.
Yeah, like this is what you go and do. But yeah, I mean, I learned about those things from him. And
Right.
so what he would expect me to do is to pick up the reins and to keep moving forward and to stand and be the responsible person that he raised me to be.
We have an English expression that you can take to your heart if you like.
Okay,
It's called keep calm and carry on.
exactly.
That's what
So
that's what dad wanted you to do, right?
that is exactly what he would want me to do. And he and it's like a whole thing, like these conversations that we would have. He's just like, you got to be a very tough-minded person.
Right.
Be very tough and let people, do your work, do a good job, but be very tough-minded.
Sure.
So that's what I did. I stayed. And the thing that was interesting, and I guess really, aside from standing and being there with my cousin,
Right.
aside from doing what I felt like my dad would want me to do in the situation, aside from all of those things, I was glad that I stayed because my nephew, who was somewhere between Tennessee and Georgia when all of the series of events happened that Friday evening,
Right.
he stayed. He got to my cousin's house. They told him that my dad was gone, and he took off running, and someone had to go and catch him because he and my father were very, very close. They either saw each other, talked to each other, or both every single day.
Wow.
And so he stayed. And so I was glad to stay to be with him, to
Sure.
stand and be a support for him too.
Well, yes.
So, it was obviously a tragic situation. It was a difficult situation, but it's important to stand in who you are
How
and
long
to
did it
try to
take you? How long did it take you to get past this phase to the point where you could start not having to focus so much on that and getting back into your life pattern again?
I don't know, because I may even still be there.
Ah, truth.
Okay. And let me tell you why. When my dad died, of course, we didn't have any type of pre-need burial or any of that other stuff. None of that was in
No,
place.
it was straight in, straight out, really, wasn't it?
Yes, you had to go in, plan, and go forward. Well, science here, when the blood stops, the heart stops beating, the blood stops flowing, a person will get darker.
Yes.
And so you have to get them embalmed ASAP. Well, because all of
ASAP.
this caught us all off guard, my father wasn't embalmed right away.
Oh,
And so we had the family viewing the day before his funeral. And so we go to the funeral home and I look in his casket. I go over, I look in his casket. And his casket was black. And he had a black suit on as well, which I was. And so I looked in there and I thought, that's not my father. And I mean, I know that he wasn't my father because it's like when the body, like the shell of the person, that person is gone. They no longer exist. But, he didn't even look anywhere remotely like my dad. So it
do you
was
not
easy.
recognize? Could you not recognize the genesis of your father in there? No.
No, no.
What? So, but
And
it
it was
was your
because
father.
it took them so long to embalm him. By the time they did, my father and I look we look exactly alike from skin tone and everything else. He was very, very dark skinned. And so it was because they didn't embalm him right away. He probably wasn't embalmed until maybe 3 or 4 days after he died, maybe 2 days later. But that's still a long time. And so if he had been embalmed right away, he probably would have looked something like my dad. But yeah, no. So it didn't look like him. And and in some respects, the other part of it is that because I am here in Columbus and they're all down in Cincinnati, I don't live in the house that he and my mother shared for 50 plus odd years or 60 years before he died. So I'm not surrounded by that all the time. So I have some space.
Of course.
Now, the one thing I will say, and this is the reason that I will admit in all honesty that I don't know where I am in that process of grieving, because I have not been back to my dad's grave since the day that he was lowered into the ground. I have not been back there since then. My mother hasn't been back there either. My nephew, oddly enough, has been countless times. So,
Okay.
but it's still a work in progress, and I'm still a work in progress, and I've got to face myself at the end of the day.
Okay. So where does this leave you? Where does this leave you? We're now how long after the event? We must be a few months after the event, where you must be trying to at least get a handle on the day to day, right?
Right. I was in the house a lot. I hadn't had I had COVID? No, I did. I hadn't had COVID yet. I picked up and I just started working, and we were working remotely. And so all good, easy ways of, again, maintaining like that buffer, that keep busy, keep busy, keep busy, that kind of thing.
It's sort of very common. Stay focused on everything around you. You won't have to focus on this big lump of coal.
Right, right, right. And I mean,
I don't mean to make you feel like you're not unique, but
I
I
just,
recognize that. I recognize that.
it's just kind of one of those things where, you know, it's like your time, my time on that wheel, that time that I have to face.
Yeah, but it must make you focus because once its essence had gone, it was gone. That was an
Right,
empty shell that was loaded in the casket. There was
right,
nothing left. So
right.
you almost have to. I know it's hard, but you almost got to pull a line in that sand and say, he left us with a series of ideas, ethos, integrity, and direction, and now we have to carry on and do with that what we can.
Exactly. And
But we
that
can't.
is basically where I am.
But to quote someone, I can't remember his name, but the past is a great place to visit, but you wouldn't want to live there.
No, no, I can't camp there, because I could really go there. And I think one of the reasons,
But there'd be no point. There'd
well,
be no point
and the other part of it though is
unless you
that
learn something from it.
I look at my mother, and I mean, she and my dad were peas in a pod. And I
Yeah,
look at her and the way that she has, as you would say, kept calm and carried on. And I have seen her do that. I've seen her do that when my grandparents died, grandfather died, grandmother died. I saw it
that's
happen when my
that's
uncle
no,
died.
that's resilience. That's resilience.
I mean, she has not like fallen out but the other part of it though is I think that it also goes back to her faith. And I also think that and I don't know if she does this intentionally or not, or like thoughtfully or not, but she's an example of how to keep moving, and to just not allow these horrid and very painful situations to take you under, to suck you down.
I think it's a matter of. I know a lot of people of faith. I also know a
Mhm.
lot of people who without have not, and I know people who are resilient on both sides. But I certainly think it's a lot easier to be resilient when you have this overriding thought pattern that there is a purpose for it, that you don't necessarily need to know what the purpose is. You just need to keep moving forward. Having faith is very useful in that because it makes you not worry or think that somehow your own mortality is now up. You just think, well, there's a purpose. I got to keep moving forward.
And it's part of life.
So as a person without faith, I envy them because I have to face reality. I am going to die. I'm way over halfway through my life, statistically, and that I've got to make this next part count for something.
Right. Exactly.
Not because it has a purpose, but just because the only thing that seems to be fulfilling, that really makes me feel, like the difference between eating Jello and eating carbs. If you eat carbs, you feel full, right? Right?
Yeah.
You Jello, you feel like you could eat another lot straight after you eat the first lot. So in the same way, when you feel like you do something that helps people or steers people, it fills you up like a meal of pasta. You feel like you've properly eaten something, and you've properly. It fills me up. So personally, my own personal mentality is I'm very aware. I also am a post-COVID victim and suffer from long COVID as well. And although I have to say my symptoms have lifted much more than yours have, but there are days where you catch yourself staring into space and thinking, how I couldn't carry on doing this every day. There has to be a way through this mess because I can't keep fighting like this. And then you keep telling yourself, keep calm, carry on. Tomorrow will be a brand new day. And then it lifts a bit the next day and you feel like you can carry on and on you go. But I can imagine when you're clutching this lead weight to your chest and trying to distract yourself with the day to day, that every so often there are chinks of reality that force
Oh
you to
yeah,
face it head on.
it is. It is. It's going to that. It creeps in. It's there. It's there. And the thing is that when it comes and how it comes, I will face it. I will navigate, and I'll have even learn. I will learn something from it. And when I learn whatever I learn, I try to pass along to other people. And
Right.
the thing that I say is take what you need. If you everything that I say you may not agree with or may not apply to you, but take what you need and leave the rest.
Do you think? I think on that note, I'm going to draw a line under today. But thank you so much. Do you know
Okay.
what? There is something for everybody in what we've been talking about today, which is to be resilient. You need to think. I think to tell yourself that tomorrow is another day. I know it sounds really trite, but I
Right.
think if you think that if you become Chicken Little and think the sky's falling in, then none of us have anything to live for.
You know, there's this thing, and then I'm gonna leave you with this, and there is a great theologian or former theologian, and also he was one of the great mentors of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and president of one of the former presidents of Morehouse College, which is the college that Martin Luther King attended. His name is Dr. Benjamin Mays. And what is not commonly known is that he used to be the people who he mentored, the young men who he mentored, were called Bucks, called him Buck Benny's boys. And I only know that because I took a class at Morehouse from someone who worked with and under Benjamin Mays as president. But he talks about how about it's basically how to number your days, numbering your days. That it's a moment by moment numbering of your days. And I'm not going to take the time to find it now because it might take me a few minutes, but I'll find it and we'll give it the next time. How's that?
I think that's wonderful.
But I'll find it. But his name was Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays. And he was one of the great teachers and okay, wait, no, here it is. I found it. It's called I only have a minute. This is one of his poems, and it's short. I have only just a minute, only 60 seconds in it. Forced upon me, can't refuse it, didn't seek it, didn't choose it, but it's up to me to use it. I must suffer if I lose it, give it account if I abuse it. Just a tiny little minute, but eternity is in it. That is one of his poems. And that's the way you have to think about life.
If you're going to do poems, all right, I'm going to tell you one of my favorite poems, which is actually by Emily Dickinson, back from, I believe, around 1815. She, which is, it's called "I Took my power in my hand." I took my power in my hand and went against the world. 'Twas not so much as David had, but I was twice as bold. I aimed my pebble, but myself was all the one that fell. Was it Goliath? Was it too large? Or was myself just too small? So I love stories about. Actually, it was about 1830. This is it's only a part of a larger poem called "The Story of David and Goliath."
Okay.
where Emily likens herself to the biblical hero, um, with her Goliath that she goes up against being the whole world. And although effectively it does acknowledge failure, what it says is don't stop trying. And I think there's something for all of us there, because it may look like your pebble's too small, but you keep going, and eventually the pebble will take aim and will hit target. You just got to keep going. Stephanie, thank you so much for taking the time out. Who knew we'd end up reading poems to each other?
Well, everybody, come back. You never know what we might do next. But no, we are talking about resilience.
And do you know what? It's not a bad thing. It's a positive thing, being resilient. All right. Until next week. Goodbye, my friends, and thank you all for listening. Bye-bye now.